I really don't need them, but I'm trying to make a fashion statement for clergy. Yeah. How many of you have ever been in a Christmas pageant when you were younger or children? Anybody? Yeah, so most of us, especially if you went to Catholic school, they had pageants every year. And even in public schools for a long time, kids could participate and they would put on a Christmas pageant, reenacting the Christmas story. Of course, public schools can't do that anymore, but our churches and our religious ed programs still make it a point during Christmas to involve young people so that they may learn the story that we are celebrating now. And it always is a wonderful sight if you've been to a Christmas pageant, watching your children or your grandchildren dress up as one of the characters in the story. That's one of the things that I miss this Christmas, because at the 3 o'clock Mass on Christmas Eve, we always had a children's Mass. And the children from our religious ed program would sign up and we would tell the story. It's always so sweet. Lots of boys wanted to be shepherds. Lots of girls wanted to be angels. A few guys would be the 3 kings. Then the most coveted characters of all, not Mary or Joseph, but the donkey and the star, somebody in the star, and of course Joseph and Mary. The costumes that some of these kids came up with, especially those who made them at home, was really amazing, sometimes funny. One year our donkey looked more like a poodle, but that was okay. When I was in a parish in Fresno for many years, our religious ed coordinator, she took the Christmas pageant way too serious. She thought she was producing a Broadway play or something. And as a result, the more effort she put into making it perfect, the more things went wrong, because you're dealing with little kids. So one year, the little girl playing Mary accidentally popped the head off the baby doll. And she spent the rest of the pageant trying to put it back on. Big distraction. Another year, a little boy who was playing a shepherd, he got mad at his little brother who was also a shepherd, and they were fighting each other with their staffs. And the best one of all, the little angel girl, who right in the middle of the play ran down the altar steps saying, "Mommy, I have to go potty." So even angels need to take a break once in a while, I guess. So here's to those great Christmas pageants that we had to miss this year, sadly. So next year we will return with one to top all others. As funny and as cute as those pageants are, and sometimes they're cheesy, okay, they are still an amazing testimony that this story is the most dramatic thing that has ever happened to the human family. That's why we cannot help but reenact it every year. The Christmas story has forever shaped our history. Whether you are a believer or not, it has shaped human history, and we cannot ignore that. Look at the Christmas story with me just for a moment. A play always begins, if you've seen a stage play, with a scene. The setting is important. So our story begins in Nazareth. The village of Nazareth, where Mary and Joseph were living, is located in the hills of Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee. It's believed that in the first century, Nazareth only had about 400 inhabitants. It's incredible. How did they know that? Because archaeologists have uncovered just a few tombs. And few tombs means few people probably lived there. They were probably farmers. And they've also discovered that Nazareth is probably about 200 square acres. That's it. A few homes of families and clans, people who knew each other. And this is where Mary and Joseph will eventually settle to bring their son up, to raise Jesus in this small rural setting. Remember, they had to flee to Egypt for a while when King Herod tried to kill all the children. They stayed in Egypt for a while. They came back to Nazareth, where they raised Jesus, where he grew up in obedience to his mother and foster father. Then the scene changes to Bethlehem. Go down south in Israel, south of Jerusalem, a couple miles away. Bethlehem was a very old city, even smaller than Nazareth at the time, maybe 300 residents. But its biblical history was rich. Ruth, who has a book in the Old Testament named after her, Ruth was from Bethlehem. Her great-great-great-grandson was King David. As a shepherd boy, he lived in Bethlehem with his family until Samuel the prophet went there to anoint him the next king of Israel. The prophets foretold that the Messiah would come from David's city, Bethlehem. And we all know, of course, that Jesus was born in the little town of Bethlehem, as our Christmas carol tells us. Today, there are about 3,000 Christians in Bethlehem. Now, having set the scene, let's talk about the characters. The first characters listed and named are powerful people. Emperor Augustus, Quirinius, the governor of Syria. They may think that they are lead players, but they're not. Luke mentions them in his gospel only to help us understand the time in history that Jesus was born. They're just time markers for us. Luke tells us that the emperor had called for a census throughout the region. Why? Because he needed money. No one would have thought it worthy to even mention a census, except for the fact that it forced a young carpenter from Nazareth to go to Bethlehem to register in his ancestral hometown. Traveling with him was a young woman. They were engaged. She was a peasant girl, born into poverty, named Mary, probably 15 years old. And we already know from the story that she is pregnant. Imagine this young couple making this trip. A woman who is pregnant on the back of a donkey or a mule, or walking over the rocky roads of Israel. Then there's an innkeeper. You know, Luke never mentions the innkeeper, but he is presumed to be in the story because they stopped at an inn to take residence there. Some people picture the innkeeper as a bad guy. They think that he turned them away. But I think it is just as true that the innkeeper was a good man. There was simply no vacancy. And he took it upon himself, apparently, to prepare the stable where Mary and Joseph could have their child. And then there are shepherds. You know, we don't know how many shepherds there were at the time, maybe a few. But what we do know about shepherds is that their role in Jewish society was a very modest one. Their work kept them out of the normal cycle of life. They would pitch their camp in the fields with their flocks. Sometimes they would remain there for weeks. And they couldn't easily, therefore, fulfill their Jewish obligations to keep the Sabbath holy. So they were thought to be kind of the worst of society. People were suspicious of shepherds. They were among the lowest class of people. And here's the irony of the way Luke tells this story. The emperor and the governor should have been there for the birth of the Messiah. They should have been invited, but the shepherds were invited instead. God is sending out the invitations. And we have to figure that God has good reason for inviting certain people. If we are among the poor today, we would take great hope in the fact that God invited lowly shepherds to witness the birth of the Messiah, and not the powerful of the earth. And then, of course, there is the angel. You know, when this heavenly visitor appeared to the shepherds, imagine shepherds being out in the field, complete darkness. And then this angel appears. They were scared out of their wits. The angel announces to them the good news that the Messiah has been born. And the angel directs them to see the child. And then we're told that a whole host of angels appeared singing God's glory, singing and proclaiming the birth of the Messiah. You know, the scriptures say a host of angels. In biblical terms, that's an army of angels sang God's praises. And that brings us now to the final scene of the story. It is the stable. This is where our Christmas story really ends, these next 2 days. You would have to bend low to get into a stable in those days. You would have flies buzzing around you. The smell would be familiar to people who have farm animals. Let's just say you might hold your breath. There were most likely animals present in the stable with Mary and Joseph and their newborn child. A strange place for the Son of God to be born. But then again, God chooses the scenes. God chooses the characters. Luke doesn't tell us very much at all about the circumstances of the birth. Nothing out of the ordinary happens. We learned that it was a boy, and that Mary wrapped him in swaddling clothes. That's strips of rags, again telling us something about this child. Luke is reminding us that the Messiah is being greeted in the same way that every other child was greeted in those days when they were born. Jesus was born into poverty. We're told that Mary laid him in a manger, which is a trough, a feeding trough for animals. Our Christmas story will continue over the next couple of weeks. We will hear about some astrologers who see a new sign in the sky. They didn't know that it was Jupiter and Saturn lined up and everything. But they followed it, apparently, to leading to Bethlehem. And then we will hear this Sunday how Joseph and Mary presented their child in the temple right there in Jerusalem for a dedication. And how 2 prophetic people recognized the child and knew the identity of the child. And then even though we won't hear about it in this year's cycle of readings, we know that an evil king will plot to kill the child. A king who was jealous at the idea that another king could be born. So Mary and Joseph will leave Bethlehem in a hurry, head to Egypt for a few years perhaps, until the danger passes, Herod dies, and then they return to Nazareth, where we're told the child grows up in their presence, obedient to them. What an amazing story we have at Christmas. It has been told and retold for over 2,000 years. Even early Christians observed the date, a date that was created on which to celebrate the birth of Christ. But because we've heard it so many times, it may seem kind of anticlimactic. It may not seem so dramatic. But think about it. That story played out 2,020 years ago in an insignificant part of the world, overwhelmed by the Roman Empire. That little event powerfully changed the course of human history, and it has changed us forever. When we hear the Christmas story, we're not a passive audience. We are both the recipients of that story's blessing, and we are participants in the ongoing drama of Jesus being present in our world. You know, the word drama refers to exciting, emotional, and unexpected series of events. Okay? Oftentimes we're going through a series of emotional events. We even say, what a drama. This is a whole lot of drama. Okay? Let's face it though, our world is filled with drama. War and hunger, sickness, poverty, hatred, division. So much drama in our world. And not only that, each of us has to contend with our own personal dramas that we are living through, whether it's financial or relationships or family life, whatever the case may be. It seems like we in our world are continually moving through a series of difficult and emotional events. So much drama. Yet, the Christmas story reminds us that this drama is about love. It reassures us that God is in control. In this love story, God comes to live among us. like one of us, except for sin. The characters in the story are not just actors. They are real people, historical people, like you and me, who faced their own drama, but who survived and thrived and changed our history for the better. And they did that by trusting in God's plan. So as we move through another Christmas together, let's remember that the love story continues to be played out for us today. God loves us so much. He sent his only Son into the world, not to condemn it, but to save it, to redeem it. That is a story worth telling over and over again.